नमस्कार, एनबीसी हिंदी में आपका स्वागत है। मैं हूं आपके साथ पूर्ति अग्निहोत्री। दुनिया की जानी मानी प्ले राइट और एक्टिविस्ट ईव एंसलर द्वारा लिखी गई बुक द अपॉलजी, जो कि उनकी ही जिंदगी की सच्ची कहानी पर आधारित है कि किस तरह से ईव के पिता ने महज 5 साल की उम्र में उनका यौन शोषण और शारीरिक शोषण किया था।
I'm Kamla Bhasin. I'm the South Asia coordinator of 1 Billion Rising, and I work with Jagori Sangat in South Asia. Welcome, Eve.
Thank you. Thank you very
Once
much.
again to Delhi. She's been here many times for the last almost 20 years. She was here in 2013, where we had the first OBR big meeting in Miranda College. And we are so glad that we are going again to Miranda tomorrow to be with students and teachers mainly. I wish to also welcome Monique Wilson, the global coordinator of 1 Billion Rising, an actor, a singer, an absolutely amazing performer. I also welcome Abha Bhaiya, the coordinator of OBR India, one of the main founders and conductors of Jagori Delhi and now Jagori Himachal or Jagori Rural. So, and I wish to also welcome and honor Anuja Gupta. She will be in conversation with Eve this evening and tomorrow, and I'll tell you more about her at the event if you are there. I mean, she's the first woman who started this conversation openly about incest, and she is an incest survivor herself. So welcome. So friends, we are here to talk about two things. One, of course, is the launch of OBR India and OBR Delhi, and we're doing it through Eve's latest book, The Apology, which focuses not only on victim survivors but also on people who do that. And we hope you will help us launch something new where men will start apologizing for what they have done to each other. So we are really hoping that we're going to launch that. And I'm very happy to say that globally, men have started a lot of organizations now where they're talking that they have to oppose patriarchy. We don't want men to support women. We want men to look after themselves, and if they behave, we are okay. So not he for she kind of you and women slogan, which we did not like at all.
Good morning, everybody, and I'm thrilled to be here with all of you, and thank you for coming. And I'm also so happy to be back in Delhi and to be back in India because I love this country so much. I don't know if you want to ask me questions first, or I can just tell you. Has everybody here read the book? So you basically, or if you haven't, just said so I can give you a little idea of what it is. Who hasn't read it? You've all, okay, so all right. But I just was thinking today, having just come from Taiwan and having come from a conference, a world conference on the Fourth World Conference on Women's Shelters, and having come from there, I was in Washington with Jane Fonda fighting for climate crisis, and then looking at the air in Delhi, and thinking of what a climate crisis we're in right now, and how deeply it is connected to women's bodies, and how we can't separate these issues at all, because all of them are what gives us life and what moves life forward, and the destruction of them it seems to be coming from the same core, which is capitalist patriarchy and xenophobia, because I also think the judgment that came down yesterday is a disgrace and a very sad day for India. And so I'll say just a little bit about the book. I think having grown up as a child who was sexually abused by my father from the time I was 5 until I was 10, and then afterwards, once I kind of resisted it and tried to fight it off, and he was beginning to be discovered in the family, he then physically battered me, almost murdering me twice. I think I always secretly believed I would grow up and my father would one day say he was sorry. I think all children believe that, like somehow that the criminal will wake up out of their slumber and their belligerent narcissism and declare I was wrong. I did it. Let me tell you what I've done to you. And guess what? that didn't happen. So 31 years my father has been dead, and I don't think a day goes by where I sometimes go to the mail and I secretly have this fantasy there's going to be a letter there that is his amends. So that's one stream of why I wrote the book. And the other stream is, in the 31 years my father has been dead, maybe 25 of those years I have worked day in, day out with many of my sisters here, and movements across this planet to end violence against all women and girls. And in that time, we have seen women break the silence, tell their stories, put themselves forward, risk humiliation, risk attack, open shelters, open hotlines. And yet in all that time, it occurred to me, I have never heard a man make a public apology for sexual abuse, for incest, for domestic battery, ever. Maybe in 16,000 years of patriarchy, there is no recorded public apology of a man. And it occurred to me that there must be something very fundamental about an apology if we've never heard them. So I thought to myself, well, we've done everything else. Why don't I write the apology to myself that I long for? And why don't I say the words to myself that I long to hear? And let my father come into me and me go into my father, and see if I can both create that apology and maybe create a template or a blueprint that other men might look at as a possible way to begin to not only free their victim, but free themselves from the terrible deeds they've done. I have a very good friend in the States called Tony Porter, who works at A Call to Men, and he says, we've called men out, now we need to call them in. And I think this recent iteration of Me Too is a wonderful iteration in that many more women have come forward to tell their stories, but I feel like we're stuck. I feel like men are now kind of like this. They're sort of on guard, they're poised, they don't know what to do, but yet they're not changing, right? There's just a kind of like, well, okay, we won't say anything, we'll hope this all goes away very soon, and then we'll just go back to life as usual. And I think unless men now take this opportunity as an opportunity to work on self-transformation, self-interrogation, really looking deeply inside themselves at the origins of their own behavior in their own families, in a patriarchal culture, in a toxic masculine world, and if they don't begin to look at the detailed accounting of what they have done, and looking at the impact their behavior has had on their victims and long-term and short-term effects of that, we're going to be stuck here for at least the next 8 years that we know we have left because of climate crisis. So that's why I wrote the book, and I've been very moved as I've toured the world to see the response of men. I've gotten lots of letters. I've seen, we've created an apology website where we see men beginning to write in apologies. And I hope this is going to generate and catalyze a process, a deep process where men begin to look inside and join us in this movement, so we're not out here continuing to do this by ourselves.
ईव को अपने पिता के दुर्व्यवहार से शारीरिक तथा भावनात्मक क्षति हुई, लेकिन कभी भी उन्होंने अपने कार्यों के लिए माफी नहीं मांगी। इसलिए एंसलर ने अपने पिता की मृत्यु के दशकों बाद उनके लिए माफीनामा लिखने का फैसला लिया।
So the fact that you wrote the novel in your father's voice, so did that help you after you'd written it? Was there any solace after that?
Deeply, deeply. I think writing this book was an excruciating process for many reasons. I think I had to, I think as we recover from violence and incest and abuse, it's like an onion. You just keep peeling the layers down until you finally get to the core of the wound. And it takes many years, and hopefully it won't take survivors as many years, because some of us have done it now, and maybe we can speed up that process. But I think this book, what I didn't want to do was feel my father's pain. I don't think, for many years, didn't feel my father had earned the right for me to feel his pain. But yet, I was still very connected to my father through my rage and through my ongoing, no matter what I did in my life, it was always, see, you were wrong. See, I'm not stupid. See, I'm not a failure. See, I'm not a slut. See, I'm not all the things that you called me. But it was still inside his story. I was living inside his story. And I wanted to get out of his story. So I think by writing this book and by allowing myself to try to understand what made my father, right? Not justify it. I think there's a big difference between justification and explanation, and I want to stress that. I think, I hope that there is no justifying in this book, but I wanted my father to explain to me what, as a child, happened to him. What, as a child, did he go through that turned him into a kind of man who was able to incest his daughter and then radically abuse his daughter. And I think by beginning to allow myself to hear that, it was almost counterintuitive. It was a huge liberation. Because when the book began, my father was this monster, and by the end he was an apologist. When it began, he was this terrifying entity, and by the end he was a broken little boy. And so, in a sense, he lost agency over me. The imagination is so powerful. I mean, we cannot, it's our superpower, right? And this book is a conjuring. I don't know if a lot of it is true or not. You know, I made up my father's voice. I made up a lot of his story. But the process of doing that in the end was an incredibly liberatory experience.
You know, you talked about the Me Too movement, and I find that very interesting because I think that some of us are also trying to grapple with, you know, the force of the testimonies, and also at the same time of what does one do with the testimonies in a manner that doesn't, or that allows us to comprehend, to go beyond the public shaming, to go beyond the naming and calling out. And I think that apology, the book, and also the concept of, you know, of remorse, for example, it offers a different, another way, it offers an alternative, right? An alternative framework. And I just don't know how to square the two out. And I'm wondering if that's a dilemma, or is that...
What do you mean square the two out?
Because on the one hand, we know that there are women who now, for example, there are cases happening in India where the women who have, you know, accused men of sexual harassment are now being taken to court in civil and criminal defamation suits. And that's a very heavy price to pay, and also the law does not have space for these accusations that were extra-legal and extrajudicial. So there is that on the one hand, but there's also the sheer freedom of being able to speak, and one recognizes that. One recognizes the need to be able to articulate and voice that, right? So I guess what I'm trying to just understand is this something that, you know, when you were writing your book, for example, and of course, it wasn't just about the Me Too movement, of course, but considering it was also happening around the same time, was that at all at the top of your mind?
Yes, because we've seen, okay, look, we've seen the accusations against Harvey Weinstein. We've seen the accusations against all of these famous men. But have we heard one of them step forward to own their behavior, to apologize with any indication they've done any work on themselves, that they've gone to therapy, that they've gone to a counselor, that they've worked on? As a matter of fact, I heard the other night that Harvey Weinstein was in a bar, a famous restaurant in New York the other night, surrounded by young girls. Okay? So what's changing? What's changing? And I think that is a deep concern of mine, that we will call out, that we will say all this. But if men are not using this as a moment to say, I've got to go and look inside. What is the culture of patriarchy? How has it made me like this? How have I been created within a toxic masculine world? What was my family? What do I believe? What is rape? What is abuse? Do I even know what it is? Am I investigating that? How will we change? How will we change? We'll be calling men out, and we'll be calling men out, and there'll be a pause, and then we'll go right back to life as usual. So I think it's critical, the stage that we have been building in this movement for 70 years, and this recent iteration, it's critical that the stories are told and we call people out. But the next stage has to be, how are we creating processes and platforms and methods for men to grapple with the tyranny of patriarchy and what it's done to them and who it's turned them into? So that's what I'm really concerned about. And I think what I hope is that the book will be a template, will be a blueprint. What is an apology? I think writing this, it really taught me to look at the anatomy of an apology. It's not, I'm sorry I hurt you. It's not, I'm sorry I abused you. That is not an apology. It has nothing to do with an apology. That's a write-off, right? An apology is I think it's 4 parts. I think it's looking at yourself and your childhood, what happened to you, what went on. Like my father, for example, he was a younger child. He was born 15 years. He was the accident that became the miracle, right? He was the idealized one. He was the, the divine right of kings. He was adored. And I think many boys are adored. But adoration is not love. Adoration is a projection of someone's self-idealized image onto you that you then are forced to live up to, which actually robs you of your humanity. If you have to be this and this and this and this and this, you can't cry, you can't express doubt, you can't be curious, you can't get lost, you can't be a human, right? You have to live up to this thing. And so what do you do with all those feelings? What do you do with your sorrow? What do you do with betrayal? What do you do with feeling unloved? You push it down and push it down and push it down. And at some point, in my father's case, when I was born, he felt an overwhelming tenderness towards me. But guess what? He had never allowed to be tender. No one had been tender with him. And so he had no idea what to do with that tenderness. And what he did as a man is he sexualized it, because that's what he knew what to do with tenderness. So I think if we don't start, okay, so that's the first part, is like looking at what is it that created me and who am I? Who am I as a man? And what are the tentacles that have created me? And then the second part is a detailed accounting of what I have done to my victim. A detailed, because liberation is in the details, right? You can say, well, I'm sorry I sexually abused you. No, what did I do? When you were 5 years old, I pulled your panties down in a room. It's the detail of that. When I threw your head against a wall, banged your head against a wall for 4 hours. Because when you get very specific about what you've done, you touch it. You touch it. And you are responsible for it. And then the next part is, what was my intention? Did I mean to undermine you? Did I mean to destroy you? Did I mean to hurt you? Did I see this beautiful, beautiful light and radiant child that I wanted to destroy because it reminded me of how I was destroyed? What is your intention? And then the third part is to allow yourself to feel what your victim felt, to open your heart. What did she feel when I was raping her? What did she feel when I invaded her body? What did she feel when she screamed no and I kept going in spite of her pleas? And to really let yourself feel it and be heartbroken by it, and to go through that wound so that you begin to change. And then the fourth part is to make amends and take responsibility for what you've done. And if you've gone through that process, it would indicate you were a person who wasn't capable of doing that again. That is a process. That is a sacred commitment that men would then be engaged in and work with their clergy, work with therapists, work with groups, work with counselors. That's the kind of processes we need to create if we are going to move forward and get out of this war that is happening between men and women.
You have said that there are these 4 processes, but what happens if men are not taught to do it? It's a culture of teaching them, but if women are not taught to teach the men, because it mostly, at least in India, it falls on the women to teach. If that doesn't happen, what happens? And here in India also, it's a much more regressive society than anywhere else. Then where do we move forward from there? And I also wanted to know about, you speak in your book, from what I've read, you talk a lot about how your father's childhood. How did you get those details? Like, did you go back to how do you get details about his childhood to say that he was, being a younger child, he was adored, like you said, or he was bullied by his older brother, his parents thought of him a certain way. How do you get those details?
Okay, first of all, I think we teach people how to pray. We're very good at teaching people how to pray, right? We teach about the constancy of prayer, the devotion of prayer, the regularity of prayer. Why don't we teach people how to apologize? We don't teach it. And particularly to men. Women are very good at apologizing. We say we're sorry for everything. Yes. But we don't teach men how to apologize. You know, there were 2 lovely men here in the interview before, and they said men don't even apologize to each other. They don't know how to apologize. And in my book, my father says to me, to be an apologist is to be a traitor to men. Right? Once one man says he's sorry and knows what he was doing was wrong, the whole story of patriarchy begins to crumble. So I would venture to say that an apology is a column of patriarchy. Like the refusal to apologize is literally holding up patriarchy, right? So first of all, we have to teach people from young ages to apologize. I have to say, apologies are so liberating. They feel so good. And I think we have to teach people how good it feels to apologize, right? You don't have to hold on knowing you were wrong and knowing you were bad and deluding yourself, right? So that's number one. And that's up to the mother and the father. I don't want all the stuff to go on to the mother. We're always blaming the mother.
Yes, but I was just talking in context.
Yeah.
It becomes so much about the mother.
Let's put it on the father too.
Yes, we must.
Okay, because they bring children up together, I hope. Second question was what?
About
How did you find out about
Childhood.
it?
Oh, well, okay, so the book is a conjuring, and it's an act of imagination. There were certain things I knew about my father, like that he was a younger child. I knew he was adored because I had heard about it from his sisters when I was growing up. There were certain pieces I knew, and then there were certain stories that I made. The book is an act of imagination, right? There are things, for example, like the story of the bird in the book. I literally woke up one morning at 4 and I heard my father's voice and he said, "Go to your office, I want to tell you a story." Like, I don't know where it came from. I don't know if it's absolutely true, but the book is an act of imagination. And I'll tell you something that I think all survivors know. When a person enters your body, invades you, has sex with you against your will, beats you, they occupy you. They occupy you. They live in you. And they live in you for many, many, many years, right? I think sometimes we know our perpetrators better than we know ourselves. I certainly know my father better than I know myself. I could live in his house, and when he would come home, I could hear his voice, I could hear his footsteps, and I could tell you whether I was going to get beaten or whether I was going to get destroyed that night, just because I knew him so well. I had to know him. It was my survival. So what I discovered writing this book is that my father lives in me. He's lived in me all these years because he put himself into me. He invaded me. And a lot of the conjuring came on the basis of knowing him that well. I carried my father's feelings for many years. I carried his melancholy. I carried his sadness. I carried so much of the feelings he wouldn't carry himself because his feelings had been beaten out of him, had been erased out of him. My mother was brought up in that same story of patriarchy and was a mother of that generation where she was poor, and my father was a way out of her poverty. And by the time my father began to manifest who he was on the level of the monstrous behavior, she had 3 children and nowhere to go. And I'm not justifying this because I had my feelings with my mother. But I think at a certain point when I finally eventually confronted my mother and I said to her everything he had done to me, a day later, a few months later, she called me and she was crying and she said, "I realized that I sacrificed you. I sacrificed you. I could not bear to be poor. I had no place to go with 3 children. And I let him do what he did so we could survive." And it was a devastating thing to hear, but I also knew it was true. Because why didn't my mother protect me? My mother certainly knew my father was throwing me against walls and telling her to get kitchen knives to stab me and doing the things, and she didn't intervene. So my mother made choices that, look, were devastating choices to me. Do I wish my mother had protected me? Of course I do. Do I understand intellectually why she didn't do? Yes. And she made amends to me, a lot of amends to me before she died. And she owned her behavior and she talked about her behavior.
ईव का कहना है कि यह किताब उम्र की गणना का ब्लूप्रिंट होगी। यह किताब उन्होंने हर उस महिला के लिए लिखी है जो अभी भी माफ़ी की प्रतीक्षा कर रही है। बाकी की खबरों के लिए बने रहें एनबीसी हिंदी के साथ।
एनबीसी के और वीडियो देखने के लिए सब्सक्राइब करें और बेल आइकन पर क्लिक करें।